this European thinking. And I very much hope that President Mas is going to unveil his thinking. I personally am pretty neutral on the question of autonomy for Europe's regions, but probably like most people here, I'm hoping that today's discussion will help me work out whether greater autonomy for regions represents the future of Europe or the end of Europe as we know it. I very much hope that President Mas will be able to address that rather large question. Mr. President, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, President, for the introduction. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I hope that the answer will be the future of Europe and not the end of Europe. Before I come to what will be the core of my speech, may I just put Catalonia into context for you. Most of you know who we are and can situate us geographically. What I mean is that I am the president of an old nation of Europe. A nation which in the 9th century lay within the boundaries of Charlemagne's Europe, what was known as the Marca Hispanica. The roots of the Catalan people have always been European, since then, more than 1,000 years ago. Their European vocation has never ceased to exist at any time in history, and is as alive and present now as it has ever been. I'm also the president of a country with a deep democratic tradition, which by the 11th century had already developed the Assemblies of Peace and Truce, embryo of what is regarded as the first parliamentarianism. I'm also the president of an institution, the Generalitat de Catalunya, whose origins lie in the 14th century, and in spite of the fact that it was prohibited for 300 years, I have the honor to be its 129th president. This historical introduction has a main purpose: to make understand that Catalonia is not a simple region of Spain, but an old nation of Europe within a territory, a culture, a language, a civil law, and a self-government institution that has been kept all along the centuries. On 14 May 2001, and so more than 11 years ago, I gave a speech in Barcelona entitled "Between Defiance and Compromise," towards a new positioning of Catalonia in the world, in which I expressed ideas such as the following. Literal quotations. Please take into account that this speech was given 11 years ago. So we'll probably listen to things that are not exactly the same nowadays, but they were like that 11 years ago. First, literal quotation. Spain has changed a great deal, and mostly for the better. Spain has ceased to be an isolated state, underdeveloped and bare, to become a state that is fully integrated into Europe, highly developed and notably modern. Catalonia has been decisive in this process of modernization, and the majority Catalanist politics have played a leading role in this. Second statement, 11 years ago. Indeed, it is true that thanks to this recent historic process, Catalonia has achieved its greatest degree of autonomy and self-government for the last 300 years. But it is equally true that our decision-making power is still very limited. If by decision-making power we mean to have the last word, that doesn't mean the only word. it has to be said that we have it on many fewer issues than those we need to take our country forward. Now, first statement, the key question is, will Catalonia have a second opportunity to round off and fill out its political autonomy? In other words, its ability to decide for itself? Fourth statement was, everything leads us to think that it won't be at all easy for Catalonia to have the second opportunity, at least within the framework of the state of Spain. The fifth, the core idea, I was saying at that time, the core idea I would like to get across this evening is this. This second opportunity for Catalonia might come from Europe. And the last literal quotation, what I'm proposing is that, without turning our back on it, we can go beyond the Spanish framework. We have done so successfully in the economic sphere. We are doing so, albeit more timidly, in the cultural sphere, and also in the field of communication. Why can't we do so in the field of political structure? We have to take advantage of all the opportunities offered by the construction of the new Europe. End of quotations. 11 years have gone by, and we find ourselves in the scenario described then. An old nation of Europe, Catalonia, that has not been able to satisfactorily resolve the way it fits into the framework of a Spanish state. A state that will not allow it to grow or develop its self-government. An old nation which, being profoundly European as it is, would like to be one more player taking part in the construction of the shared project. At the moment, in the European Union, particularly at the heart of the Eurozone, attention is mostly focused on how to get out of the economic crisis and on a discussion of what mechanisms must be established to avoid more crises such as this one appearing in the future, and on how to deal more swiftly and effectively with whatever crisis may occur. These questions, which this very day will receive particular attention in the press conference that the member of the Commission, Olli Rehn, is giving to present the economic forecast for the 27, or indeed in the speech which Chancellor Merkel will give this afternoon to the European Parliament, cannot leave aside one fundamental, urgent issue: the need to adjust the European Union's political and institutional structure to the new realities of a world that is changing ever more rapidly, and which calls for brave, imaginative responses from those in power. The Paris and Rome treaties, as well as that of Maastricht and even that of Lisbon, have been surpassed by the current crisis, and there is a need to think of a new Europe that will recover its cohesion and its executive capacity so as to present itself to the world as a politically strong, coherent group, and to its citizens as a guarantee of their security and well-being, and as a defender of the individual who must feel he or she is properly represented in its institutions. At the political level, the unilateral interests and visions of the states carry much more weight than do the search for common positions and the design and implementation of common action. Albeit with some reservations, the description of the European Union as an economic giant and a political dwarf is still valid. Let us think of the early days. Let us recover the spirit of the founders. The project of Schuman and the founding fathers mixed pragmatism in the method with the broadest ambition in its aims. If you closely reread the Declaration of 9 May 1950, whose topicality is still surprising, you will see that it contains the basis of a project whose ultimate aim is the creation of a federal structure that will group the states of Europe together. Some have named this old ambition the United States of Europe. The current president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, spoke to me more a year ago about his youthful dream to see a United States of Europe. In these recent years of severe economic crisis, there has been a lack of European supranational focus when it comes to confronting problems and proposing solutions. The impression has been given that Europe is not governed by the Commission, nor by the European Central Bank, nor even by the Council of Ministers or the permanent President of the Council. Today's European citizen has the impression that decisions in Europe are taken in just a few capitals of the most powerful member states and not in the European institutions themselves. And that the only subjects of debate are currency, market, and economy. And this is right, but not enough. As President Delors said, no one will fall in love with a common market. Today, we could say, no one will fall in love with austerity programs or fiscal pacts. And European citizens need to be excited with more transcendental ideas than a mere market, and so build on the basis of our diversity a truly common project. I know that the main ideas of this model of European construction that are current in Brussels can be summed up in 2 points. First, the proposal published in the book Debout l'Europe by Daniel Cohn-Bendit and Guy Verhofstadt, which heralds a federal European state, and in which the authors note, literally, l'Europe ressemble de plus en plus à un monument historique, un continent marginalisé qui se bat pour survivre dans une nouvelle ère et un nouveau monde. And also, it adds, l'Europe ne joue plus aucun rôle significatif. C'est la faute de la conception bornée de la souveraineté par laquelle les États membres ont amputé les traités de notre drapeau et de notre hymne. I know that the main political observers regard this as unrealistic, because while it is considered necessary for member states to share sovereignty, to eliminate it altogether provokes great reticence. Europe is too big and too diverse not to be federal. The question is, on the opposite side, whether history weighs too heavily on Europe for it to achieve a federal solution. Second, the one known as the Delors formula of a federation of nation states, and the alternative proposal built on the same thesis by the President of the Commission, José Manuel Durão Barroso. Delors bases his proposal on the community method, which is the basis of the entire system and which needs to be strengthened and improved while accepting the possibility of reinforced cooperation, which will lead in fact to a multi-speed Europe. President Barroso again takes up the federal formula, but rejects the idea of a two-speed Europe. Between these two theses, we can talk of the need to build a United States of Europe, a United States that cannot be a copy of the United States of America on account of the significant importance of people's own languages and culture, as well as their own histories. But this new, much more federal European reality must be built on the basis of those nations which, having a clearly defined territory, history, language, and culture, and is the case with Catalonia, have the will, as expressed democratically at the ballot box, to be their own player in the construction of the new Europe. Our proposition is a clear one: to cede all the powers necessary to give real strength to the European Union while implementing policies that are closer to the people in fields such as health, education, social policy, and so on, in those places where this can be done more efficiently and consistently. Just as the states cannot act as a brake on the construction of the European project, neither can they act as a brake on the will of those nations without statehood that democratically and peacefully express their will to be one more player in the process of European construction. Nowadays, and this is our theory, to want one's own state within the framework of the European Union is to be willing to cede powers to the European institutions. Consequently, our process is much more than the recognition of our national identity within the framework of a united Europe. It is much more than a process to what some people call sovereignty, given that we are totally in favor of a Europe with federal structures where decisions do not require interminable negotiations and lengthy ratification procedures before coming into force. When I am asked in Catalonia if I want an independent state, I reply that what I want for Catalonia is its own state that must necessarily share interdependencies with a more united and stronger Europe. We want our own state within an interdependent and federal European Union. That is why I'm proposing a real European integration. For us, the Catalans, the border has never been a defining element of our identity, and neither do we want to build new borders. On the contrary, we are an example of how European integration has enabled us to depart from the limits of the classical state in a full range of fields. Infrastructure, companies, university students, and culture. All our large strategic projects have a European dimension and acquire the full meaning within the European space, and in our case, the Mediterranean space too. I will give you an example. Catalonia as a logistics center within the Mediterranean corridor within the Trans-European transport network. When Catalonia aspires to be the point or one of the points of entry in southern Europe for goods from Asia or Africa, it does so not thinking in terms of the Iberian Peninsula, but rather it does so with a European vocation and dimension. It is because, in the second part of my speech, let me tell you why I called elections 2 years before the end of the mandate. It is because the citizens of Catalonia have shown their will in huge numbers on the streets that I have decided to call the next elections. In order to verify this will, in the only way things can be so verified in a democracy, through the vote and through the ballot box. And so the people of Catalonia can say clearly and without subjective interpretations if they want to be consulted about their future and Catalonia's status as a political subject during the next legislature. We will be holding elections in Catalonia on 25 November. They are early elections that I have called after 1.5 million people demonstrated peacefully through the streets of Barcelona on 11 September last. And after the Spanish Prime Minister, Mr. Rajoy, slammed the door on the possibility of negotiating a fiscal pact, which had been approved by an ample majority in the Catalan Parliament. Our proposition is based on the heart of democracy, on the expression of democracy based on the right to decide. Catalonia must be able to decide democratically and peacefully what it wants its future to be within the framework of the European Union. During the course of the next 4 years, this process will lead us, if so approved at the election, to consult the people of Catalonia about what they want their future to be. What do we want this process to be like? what do we promise it will be like? Once the consultation process is endorsed by ballot, it must be framed in the following terms. First, radically democratic. The entire process must be endorsed in its most significant aspects by the direct decision of the people of Catalonia. Second, absolutely peaceful. This process must show Europe and the world the way Catalans do things, with a positive spirit, the absence of violence, and the willingness to reach agreements. Demonstrably transparent. The process must be clear and have a defined roadmap. Everyone must be sure about the situation facing them. Fourth, with an ample majority. There must be an ample majority in Parliament on which to base the right to decide in order to start a consultation process. Having started the process, these two must be endorsed by a sufficient majority, one that does not divide the country into halves. I have always said that I would not want a majority of 50.5% against 49.5%. And finally, and I have already said, the Catalan process has a vocation to remain with the framework of the European Union and the Euro. It would be senseless for a nation that forms part of the European Union and the Euro and that wants to continue forming part should not be able to do so. Let me say that Catalonia, although being a very small nation, has never in its history let Europe down. Now we trust Europe will not let us down. There are those who have wanted to question the viability of a future Catalan state on account of its size, despite the fact that Europe clearly demonstrates that on most occasions it is the small states that have greater ability to respond to the new challenges that arise. In Europe, the countries that have led the rapid economic recovery from the end of 2009 until mid-2011 were the small Central European, Scandinavian and Baltic countries, based on a brilliant recovery of industrial exports and the prior restoration of the flow of bank credit to companies and families. In their book, The Size of Nations, Avesina and Spolar, teachers at the MIT, point out that the more open and integrated the world becomes, the greater the incentive for small countries to create their own state. More efficient, more homogeneous, and governable, and more responsive to the preferences of their inhabitants. In this final part of my speech, I will provide you with some data that demonstrate the viability of a future Catalan state, and that demonstrate also that in the south of Europe too, there are realities that work and that can work in the future. A future Catalan state would be in 7th position amongst European countries in terms of capita GDP, 7th position. And as it has been up to now, it would continue to be a net contributor to the Union. Catalonia has been net contributor to the European Union since the beginning, since Spain joined the European Union in 1986. In terms of aggregate GDP, we would be in 13th position, so in the average of the European Union. In terms of population and territory, we are a small country with 7.5 million inhabitants and 32,000 square kilometers. We will be the 16th and the 23rd countries in the European Union, 27 respectively. With regard to openness to foreign trade, Catalonia would occupy the 13th position, the European average. More significant data about Catalonia. 40% of the research funds assigned to the state of Spain come to Catalonia. 28% of total exports from the state of Spain live from Catalonia. Catalonia receives nowadays 15 million foreign tourists with a population of 7.5 million inhabitants, representing more than a quarter of the tourists who visit Spain. With regard to foreign investment, Ernst & Young's European Attractiveness Survey situates Barcelona and by extension Catalonia as the third most attractive area after London and Paris. These are only some of the most basic data to demonstrate the viability of Catalonia having its own state. Please allow me to finish as I started. I'm the 129th president of our self-government institution, the Generalitat de Catalunya, the president of an old European nation with more than 1,000 years of history, a cradle of democracy, and, as our renowned cellist Alcazar said, with one of the oldest parliaments in the world. A nation that feels, and wants to continue to feel, European on account of its history, its tradition, and its vocation. A nation that expects Europe not to let it down, as I said before. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, President Mas. I think wherever one stands in the debate on Europe's future, you've certainly contributed to discussion and to new thinking. We've got about half an hour left for questions to President Mas and for general debate. In a moment I'm going to ask Teresa Kirkler, who's the Brussels correspondent for Svenska Dagbladet, to give a sort of brief reaction to what we've all heard, and in a way that's intended as to prime the pump of questions from the floor, and I hope not just from journalists. I speak as a former journalist. I'd like to put, President, 4 questions to you, also to prime the pump, and they don't come from me. They come from Friends of Europe's online discussion forum. It's called Debating Europe. We do it in partnership with the European Parliament. And the moment we put up on the Debating Europe site news that President Artur was coming to Brussels and was going to talk about Catalonia's future. We had a deluge of questions and comments online, and out of that I chose 4, which seem to me to sort of cover the spectrum of opinion and questions. So, President, with your permission, I'm going to read them out. The first is from somebody called Cassia, and she said, "I can understand the Catalans' wish for independence. However, I think this will cause yet more problems for Spain, Europe, and the Eurozone. Instead of full independence, Catalonia should encourage a looser federal structure." I took that to mean a looser federal structure for Europe, although it could also mean for Spain. Second question or comment from somebody called, I don't know if this is a Christian name, I think it's a surname, Ituriaga. The European Commission has already pointed out that any state seceding from an EU member will not remain within the EU and will be forced to go through the entire membership process, which requires the approval of all member states, including Spain. Third question, Raquel. Obviously, a nicer solution than Catalan independence would be a united Europe not based on nation states. And finally, a correspondent called Anton said, if the response from Madrid had been along the lines of dialogue and compromise, Catalonia would have probably been satisfied with some sort of federation. Now it's too late. People have made their minds up. The middle classes have already decided, and most people just want independence. So those are 4 out of many contributions we had to debate in Europe. I throw them into the debate to stimulate discussion, but I suspect discussion needs no stimulation. And right now, Teresa, why don't you give us, on behalf of the Fourth Estate as a whole, your reactions?
Good day. I work for a Swedish newspaper. I've been traveling back and forward to Barcelona a couple of times during the last few months, and I'm here to share with you some of my observations and some of my thoughts, and also to trigger some of the answer questions afterwards. I'm sure many of you would probably disagree with my observations. They are not at all a base for statistics or anything. My first observation, I was just asking random people for 3 days in Barcelona about the upcoming elections and the possibility of a referendum in Catalonia. My first observation is that moment and semantics are key in this issue. When is the right moment? Is this the right moment for Catalonia to break loose from Spain or to become its own state or country or nation? Even Mr. Mas in his speech here shifts between nation, country, state, own state. The semantics there is a little bit unclear whether, and one comment is, this is definitely the right moment. We have reached momentum. This is the time for us to break loose, because we have noticed that in times of crisis we do better. In times of crisis the government in Spain does not listen to us. They never had, but even less so now. But the second comment is, and this is actually 50-50, if I look at my note, and I spoke to 37 people, 50-50 is the people, this is really not the right moment. We are in an economic crisis. Why are we going to create a constitutional crisis right now? We don't know what that would mean, whether our own state or nation or country. What would that mean for us right now? All we know right now is that even Catalonia, no matter how rich it is, has also lost jobs and has also been affected by the crisis. So the right moment here, Mr. Mas says that there could be an own nation, an own country in the European Union for 2020, if I have read the reports correctly. That's a very brief period. And I think one of the questions is this really the right moment? Can Mr. Mas be sure of getting all the votes he wants? Because at the end of the day, when you go to the ballot box, maybe the even staunchest pro-Catalonian independence would actually say, this is a tricky time. I might just wait with my vote for this one. This is my observation. Second observation was, again, I talked about semantics. The question that Mr. Mas has suggested to pose to the Catalans are not, would you like to become an independent state? And he also gave us his reasons for why not wanting to use independent state. But the question would be, would you like to be an own state within the European Union? Now, obviously, we're shifting the focus radically. I don't think that today you would be able to find even 5 people in what is today Spain, not in the autonomous regions or in the rest of it, that would like to leave the European Union. And obviously the question, the way it's posed, could be interpreted as, if you say no to this question, then you have something against the European Union. I know this is tricky, this is how you interpret words. But if you look at the demonstrations that went down on the 15th of September in Barcelona, over 1 million people wearing flags and chanting, they weren't chanting a federal Europe, we want a federal Europe. They were not chanting, we want to be a part of the European Union, but on our own. They were chanting independence, independence, independence. That was read on their pancart. So I've also spoken to people who say, even pro-Catalan independence, as I said, this is an intellectually dishonest question and debate. It's not about the European Union. My third observation is, obviously, since I'm based in Brussels since many years, is Catalonia's part of Europe. And here I turn directly to Mr. Mas. I asked a question to President Mas in Barcelona a month ago, where I said, who are your friends in Europe and who have you spoken to? And I don't think I got a clear answer then, so I'm going to ask the question again. I haven't heard a single president or prime minister stand up and say, yeah, obviously we're receiving President Mas today in Brussels, so we're going to give him our full support, or we're going to debate this at the next summit, or apart from the obvious friends, which would be other regions who have, I still want to know, I would like Mr. Mats to tell us, please, who are you, at least I've observed from in this city and in capitals. Have you spoken to anybody, and what do you think are your chances to get support from the European member states? And finally, I would also like to, and they talk about the 7th place in the GDP League of Europe. As I said before, I've met people on the street who say it's not entirely true that Catalonia is rich and the rest of Spain is poor. There are people who have lost their jobs and who feel incredibly worried right now also in Catalonia as it stands today. However, would you become your own state, country, nation? I actually don't, I don't come from a country where these words are often used in the debate. You would have to set up new borders, police authorities, customs authorities, slits around the whole world. You would have to basically create, I suppose you can take over the rests of what the current administration is, but do you have the money right now, before the year 2020, which is your plan?
We will.
To set up all the necessary institutions and other, to create an own state in Europe. I don't think that anybody doubts the European vocation that you have spoken about here today. As a journalist who has spent a year, I just know that it's incredibly tricky, and you need friends, and you need allies, and even with allies, there's always going to be the Spanish veto, but not only the Spanish veto, there's going to be probably other vetoes. Countries with difficult relations to their neighbours are not so popular in Brussels. And these were my observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. The only thing I would add to your comments is actually the last 20 years have seen an enormous number of new countries, or old countries re-emerging, the Baltic states and ex-Yugoslavia being the ones that spring to mind. President Mas, what I suggest is you go to the lectern, you answer Teresa's points, and maybe the 4 ones that I read out. And then I've already got a number of sort of bids in the audience, and if we can squeeze those in as well, I think that would be great.
Well, let me first focus on the first questions we put on the table. If Catalans wish independence, this will provoke some problems to Spain and maybe to the European Union. It would be better to try to build up a federal structure and so on. Well, I think that the right answer would be the following one. Imagine that the European Union turns into the United States of Europe. Imagine that scenario. In this case, with a federal structure, Catalonia would like to be one of the single or normal states of that federation. If you look at the United States of America, you will realize that with a population of about 300 million people, they have 50 states. The European Union, with more than 500 million people, could have more than 60 or 70 or maybe 75 states. And why not Catalonia could be one of these states? In a federal structure and with the powers of a state which belongs to a federal structure. So less powers than an independent country, but more powers than we have today. In that case, Spain would have less powers, and France, and Germany, and Holland, but Catalonia would have more powers, because we would be one state out of the amount of states of the future European Union, if the European Union, as I said, turned into a real federation. If not, if the European Union is not capable to turn into a real political federation, then our aspiration is to have the same tools and the same powers as other nations of our size have in Europe. For instance, the same tools as Denmark, or the same tools as Austria, or the same tools as Finland. It was an amazing answer. The question of not remaining in the European Union, the probable veto of Spain and other countries, this also links with a question that Teresa was asking. Take into account that all this process started in Catalonia a few weeks ago. The demonstration took place on 11 September this year, so 2 months ago. Just after the demonstration on the streets of Barcelona and the answer, the negative answer of President Rajoy to the fiscal agreement, to the fiscal pact, just after that, I decided to call elections. This has been a very rapid process, and as you can imagine, we don't have all the answers now, but we have a very important answer. We will see if in the next Catalan elections there is a broad majority of the Catalan people who want to decide their future in the following 4 years. This is something that can be decided now, in a fortnight. If there is this broad majority, then the process starts. And of course, this process has different steps. A referendum, or a point of the consultation or the referendum, of course, to the Spanish central government, try to reach an agreement with them, try to do what the Britons did some days ago, reach agreements about the date, about the year, about the way of asking people, about the legal link of the answer of the people, and so on. So what is decisive in this point we are, is that there is a firm commitment to ask Catalans for their future. And this will happen in the next 4 years. Is this compatible with belonging to the European Union? Well, nobody can say yes, and nobody can say no. Nobody can say yes, okay. Nobody can say no. Because if the base, one of the principal bases of the European Union is the democratic values, and the permanent purpose of the European Union is to enlarge its capacity and its union, it would be not very evident that a country as Catalonia, that belongs to the European Union, that fulfill with the commitments, fulfill with the rules, and is a net contributor, why the European Union would take the decision to to leave us out. It would be not very logical. It could be, but it would be not very logical.
Mr. President, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but I'm quite keen, and I'm sure you are too, to get a sort of feel for what the sort of questions and comments are from around the floor. So should we take some of those, and then maybe you can sort of feed your other answers in. Let's start with this gentleman here, and then over there, and then at the back. May I ask you, first of all, introduce yourselves. Secondly, no speeches, short questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm a politician, so I never make a speech. My name is David Martin, and I come from Scotland, so I have more than a passing interest in your situation in Catalonia and followed it for a long time. I see two contradictions in what you've told us this afternoon. Firstly, you wish to show solidarity and unity with the European Union at the same time as smashing one of its building blocks, the member states. And that seems to be a contradiction in terms that you object to sharing your fiscal resources with Spain, but you're quite happy to share your fiscal resources with the rest of the European Union. And secondly, I understand your preferred question for a referendum is, do you want an independent Catalonia within the European Union? And yet this afternoon you've just admitted you cannot, that is not in your hands. You cannot deliver a Catalonia in the European Union. You have to wait and see the judgment and opinion of other people. So are you not putting, as we say in English, a pig in the poke to the Catalonian people in putting the question that way?
Okay, there's one very question. Let's have another.
Well, I'm a member of the European Parliament from Poland, verdadero polaco como usted. I'm the coordinator of the EPP in the Constitution Committee. And I have great sympathy for Catalonia. I'm a socio Barca, but I have a question.
Well done.
When it comes to your independence, I mean, you know, we are in grave political and constitutional difficulties here now in Europe. And when I hear some of your messages, I mean, it seems you brush over the whole question of really renegotiating your entry towards the European Union, because it's absolutely clear that Catalonia, if Catalonia were to become an independent state, you would have to come into the very, very difficult process of renegotiating all your international treaties and duties and so on and so forth. We have a precedent in the European Union when Greenland left. I mean, they had to renegotiate everything. I mean, how difficult is that? Do you make the Catalonian people aware of how difficult this process would actually be? Thanks.
Okay. If I could summarize that rather long question, do you meet the acquis? Over there, yes, please.
My question, I'm Vanessa Mock from Dow Jones Wall Street Journal, is a similar one just now to the gentleman's, so I'm going to switch to another one. Have you been in contact with Mr. Alex Salmond, or here in Belgium, Bart de Wever? If so, on what level? And who today are you speaking to in Brussels? Presumably you are trying to gain, as Teresa said, some of these valuable friends. We know that there's been sceptical reactions at the European Commission on many levels about what exactly the membership steps would be. Have you had those discussions? And could you share?
Yes, please.
Dano from CEPS, a think tank here in Brussels. Thank you for a very interesting speech, Mr. Musk. I'm Belgian, I'm Flemish myself. I've been following this debate as a Flemish for the last 30, 40 years here in Flanders. But if I hear you speak of attitude of Europe, but the Europe you would need is Europe a set of member states. I mean, you ask for a European identity, but it doesn't exist today. And I feel, let's say, one and a stronger Europe.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, please.
President Musk, that your project...
Could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm Gabriel Bouet, Chief of the Keroc, and I'm actually Breton from a region which is called Bretagne. It's a special language, music, etc. Which is today a French region that actually existed independently a while ago, when Catalonia was still part of the French kingdom, by the way. So my question is, Bretagne was poor, and now it's a bit better, because local politicians managed to become national politicians.
Very short time, so keep it.
But you will understand my question at the end. It's very short. So the explanation is that local politicians managed to become national politicians at French level, so that they can influence decisions in favor of Bretagne, which is today, for instance, the capital of telecoms. So my question is a bit rude, but it's straightforward. why don't you try to become the Prime Minister of Spain instead of creating your own business?
Very well. Any more? Yes, please.
My name is Francisco Bryan. I am Director General Honorary of the European Commission. Will you check the process of Scotland in the relations with the European Commission and the preparations for the armed state? Thank you.
Okay. I think that's the end of the questions. I will add one question of my own. The Eurozone crisis, it's all about solidarity. And what I'd like to know is, were Catalonia to become more autonomous or independent, and other regions in Europe, do you actually think that would improve the solidarity crisis, or make it much worse?
Okay. A lot of questions. I don't know if I will be able to answer all the questions, but let me try. When you talk about solidarity, I think that it would be fine not to forget that Catalonia is a very solidarity country. We'll give you some figures very briefly. If you analyze all the economic transfers from Catalonia to the rest of Spain, what we call the fiscal deficit every year, it makes up approximately 8% of our GDP. Do you know other countries or other lands in the rich European countries that are giving so much money to their states? And as you can, I think that you can agree with me that when you see what happens in Germany, you will see that Bayern or Baden-Württemberg or Hessen are trying to transfer less money to Berlin. But if you analyze what is the amount of money according to their GDP of these German lenders, and you compare it with what happens in Spain with Catalonia or the Balearic Islands, you will see that there is a huge difference. There is a big difference. So, if the question is solidarity, we are the winners. We know a lot about solidarity. And I said before at the beginning of my speech that since the beginning, Catalonia has been net contributor to the European Union. But from centuries, not decades, but centuries, we have been contributors, net contributors to the Spanish state. And the most important thing is that we are not against solidarity. We are not against solidarity. Some weeks ago, I tried to reach an agreement with President Rajoy on the fiscal pact, the fiscal agreement that the Catalan Parliament had approved some months before. And in our proposal, in the proposal of the Catalan Parliament, there was the concept of solidarity. So our attempt was more fiscal powers for Catalonia, more capacity of the Catalan Parliament to modify taxes, more power or more powers to collect taxes, but at the same time an agreement to study how Catalonia can contribute in a solidary way in the next years to the rest of Spain. Are the Catalan people aware of difficulties? They know that this will be a very difficult process. We know it for certain. but we don't fear, because we have reached the conclusion, and the conclusion is, what is the other alternative we have? We have been 3 decades trying to help Spain to be democratic, to be European, to be developed, to be modern, to have a very important welfare state, and so on. And our dream and our aim was that this kind of state, the Spanish state, would be respectful to Catalan dreams and Catalan needs. But it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. And people on the streets are saying, this way doesn't work. And they are asking us, politicians and leaders in Catalonia, to change the way. And to change the way in which direction? Of course, in the direction which is natural for us, Europe. We have helped a lot Spain to be integrated in Europe. We helped Spain in the 80s, when the integration in the European community, and we helped Spain to join the euro, and we have backed all the Spanish governments, left side and right side. They have helped them. We have helped them to do the homework, to be integrated in the euro. And what has been the answer? What has been the response? And this is why the answer has been negative. And this is why a lot of people in Catalonia say, stop, we have to change our way. We have to try other things. And among these other things, why not our own state? If we have the capacity and we have the will, then we can try it. We can try it. At least we can try it. Other questions were the kind of context we are having with other leaders in Europe, with people in the European Commission, and so on. In the specific case of the Scottish Prime Minister, there are some political contexts between political parties, Catalan and Scottish political parties, but not at the level of governments. Because we know that the process in Scotland is a little bit different than the process that can occur in Catalonia. It's a little bit different. Take into account that the position of Scotland within the United Kingdom is not exactly the same than the position of Catalonia within Spain. It's different. So, I presume that in the future we will have contacts. But they are more advanced in the process because they have an agreement with the British Prime Minister. They know when they will make the consultation, and they know the question. And by far, this is much more advanced than what we have in Catalonia nowadays. In Catalonia, we have the will, we have the project, we have the idea, and probably we'll have the people backing this kind of process. There was a question about why I don't try to become Prime Minister of Spain. Because nobody would vote for me. This is, let's say, the ironic answer. But the real answer is that I don't want to be Prime Minister of Spain. This is the real answer. I don't want to be Prime Minister of Spain. There are a lot of Spanish politicians in other regions, autonomous communities, and so on, who have the dream to go to Madrid. They can be president of a region, but their aspiration is to go to Madrid, not to be president of the Spanish government, to be ministers. In the last decades, we have had a lot of opportunities to have ministers in Madrid, because different Spanish governments have offered us to have ministers in the central government. But our goal and our aspiration is not to have ministers in Madrid. And of course, in my imagination, I don't think about the possibility of being Prime Minister of Spain, because for me, and this is an individual answer if you want, for me it is more important to be President of Catalonia than President of the central government in Spain. I'm not involved in politics to become Prime Minister of Spain, but I'm involved in politics to be President of Catalonia and to try to lead a project for our country. What would happen with our GDP if there is a process of, let's say, independence of Catalonia, or the creation of a new state and so on? What would happen with the GDP?
Army.
With?
And possibly an army.
Possibly an army, okay. Well, according to the studies we have, and there are official studies in this sense, taking into account that our fiscal deficit is about, as I said, 8% of our GDP every year, that means more or less 15-16 billion euros every year. 15-16 billion every year. With that money, even if we had to spend more money for the structures of a state, we could save a lot of money. Another different thing is how would a kind of separation affect our GDP? And of course, the GDP is not only in the public side, it is also in the private side. Basically, it is in the private side. This is a very difficult question, because you never know. You never know. It is quite likely that in the short term, there is a certain amount of affectation, we don't know, but in the long term, it doesn't work like that. Because in our opinion is that economy is over this kind of political processes. And in the end, we will be all together in the European Union. If, and I try to answer another question, if the situation arrives in the sense that the only way for Catalonia to have an own state is out of the European Union, we will have to explain to the Catalan people what are the consequences, and send them the responsibility to answer in a consultation if they want an own state, even with the possibility of being out of the European Union. We cannot imagine this situation, but if that occurs, then of course the question can be also put with all the information on the table. In our project, the condition to belong to the European Union is a very important condition in our project. So, if within the process we reach the conclusion that it is absolutely impossible to become in the European Union, then we will rethink our strategy. But even in that case, the question can be put. Because the most important thing, more than to have our own state, is the right we have to be consulted to decide our future. This is the main point, and the basic point, and the most important point. And this is something that we are committed to do in the next mandate.
President Mas, I think we've run towards the end of our time.
Who are your friends? Who are your friends? We don't even know you.
Our friends are all the people who love democracy.
Thank you very much for coming here today. I think your friends are probably all around you, because I think that the future of Catalan independence will be watched with great interest and curiosity right around Europe. I also think that there are going to be two catalysts which will create the discussion of where Europe is going. One, of course, is the Eurozone crisis. The other is the whole question of regional independence, autonomy, whatever we want to call it. Scottish would say national independence, but there we are. Thank you very much for coming here today, and I hope maybe we can invite you back at some point for an update, a progress report on how it's going.